successful and a holding against at all times.
Be careful!
Government officials insist that this is isolated and the packets were handled.
It was London, late summer, 1977. The air was thick, heavy with the kind of damp what clings to your bones and whispers that winter's already waiting in the wings. The street lamps burned pale in the mist, casting their jaundiced glow on the slick brickwork of Green Street, every house looking the same, till you stared long enough and realised one of them was staring back. Number 284 weren't cursed in the way fairy tales warn you about. No broken mirror in the window, no black cat watching from the sill. Its evil was quieter, a patient kind, like a splinter buried under your skin, working its way deep with each passing day. It started with a Ouija board, a whispered dare to sleep over, a sound you convinced yourself was the house settling, till the knocks got louder, until the knocks started knocking back. Inside was a single mother, Peggy Hodgson, doing her best to hold together a life that kept coming apart at the seams. 4 kids under her roof, bills stacked like tombstones, the kind of woman what didn't scare easy. Not till the night her furniture decided to stop walking without her. First come the noises, faint scrapes in the dark, like someone dragging a nail along the inside of the walls. Then the bangs, heavy, deliberate, like fists on the bones of the house. And the thing about this sound was, it moved, room to room, floor to floor. You couldn't follow it, because it was already ahead of you. The neighbours heard it, Vic and Peggy Nottingham. They thought they was coming over to calm some nervous kids. Instead they found themselves listening to a sound that didn't belong to pipes, wind or any living thing. Even the old Bill showed up, and for a moment Enfield became a place where the law could only stand in the doorway and watch. A chair slid across the floor by itself that night. Not shoved or kicked, moved. Slow enough to see, fast enough to know it weren't right. The copper checked for wires, uneven boards, anything that could make sense of it. She found nothing, and she wrote it down in her official report as if putting it on paper could make it less daft. If this were a hoax, it was an ambitious one. It meant neighbours, journos and coppers was all in on the joke. And if it weren't, then there was something in that old house. Something old. Something that had found a family it could play with till they broke. And in the middle of it all was Janet Hodgson, 11 years old, with the wide-eyed look of someone who'd already seen too much. She was the lightning rod, the focus, the name whispered when the lights went out. Whatever was in that house liked her best, or maybe it just hated her less. Some people say ghosts haunt places, others say they haunt people. But what lived at 284 Green Street, it weren't content to choose. It wanted both. This is the story of the Enfield Poltergeist, where the truth is slippery, the lies are obvious, and somewhere in the dark the walls are still knocking. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dancing Toaster. This is Pastor Nelly, and this is the place where we wrestle with the intersection of faith and the unexplained. I hope I didn't butcher the accent too bad. It's so fun to do. As you can see, or guess here in this case, today we're continuing our journey to the top 5 places outside of the US where people are enjoying the Dancing Toaster. Today, that takes us across the pond, across the Atlantic to the United Kingdom, specifically merry old England, to a place called Enfield, a borough in the northern part of Greater London. Our case, the Enfield Poltergeist, took place in Brimston, a working-class district in the eastern part of Enfield, on Green Street, in a council housing estate. But before we start our deep dive, it's time for thank yous. First, thank you to my UK listeners. Thank you all once again for joining me. You could be listening to 1,000 other things, so the fact that you're here, it blows me away, so I thank all of you. Thank you, Bo, from the Bump Podcast, for allowing me onto your show. That happened. It was awesome. It came out last Wednesday. If you haven't checked it out yet, what are you even doing with your life? Head over there. Check it out after you listen to this. And if the Bump sent you over here to the Dancing Toaster, thank you for joining us. Many came last December when Bo gave us a shout out. I hope many more of you guys come join me this summer. If that's you, drop a rating, leave a comment or something, let me know how I'm doing. I also want to thank Shelly specifically for becoming a toastie. Thank you and welcome. My toasties are the patrons over on Patreon. $5 a month helps support my work, get you early access to content, you get ad-free listening, and you get access to exclusives, specifically a new show launching after the summer, The Toaster Files. They'll be starting with something called MESS, the Ministry of Esoteric Supernatural Studies. It's going to be the Ghostbusters meets the X-Files meets The Chosen. I'm just kidding. It's about a team of 5 investigators taking on cases in the fictional northwestern town of Ashwood Pines. But their adventures will take them well beyond the Pacific Northwest and beyond this realm. The episodes will be broken into chapters and arcs that I can't wait to share with you, and the stories will of course be told in the storytelling style of The Dancing Toaster. Check out the YouTube channel if you want to see the trailer. Some new merch stuff is coming, and unlike before with the man-eating toaster, I'm going to keep the Toaster Files exclusive. No full arcs will be released outside Patreon, only teasers with the hopes of creating FOMO. Yes, I do want you to join the Patreon. Nay, I say I need you to join the Patreon, as I am all in on The Dancing Toaster. If you want to help me continue this work, head over to the Patreon, or you can go to the PayPal, thebuymeacoffee.com/The Dancing Toaster. If you want to rep The Dancing Toaster around your town, head over to the merch store. Get some Dancing Toaster gear at thedancingtoasterstore.printful.me. Alright, I'm gonna shut up. That's more than enough housekeeping. Let's now go to the house on Green Street for a proper telling of the case of the Enfield Poltergeist. Like so many nightmares, it started with a Ouija board. Or at least that's what the girl said when the whole thing finally came crashing down. Sold as a nippers game in a cardboard box, shrink-wrapped easels sold next to jigsaw puzzles in dollhouses. They thought they was just playing. The kind of playing that turns into praying once the lights go out. It'd be years before the real damage showed its mug. Years before the shadows in the wall stepped into the light. When it did, it hit like a brick through a church window. Loud, ugly, and impossible to ignore. By the end, there'd be coppers, reporters, and blokes in lab coats trying to make sense of something you can't make sense of. They'd call it a haunting. They'd call it a poltergeist. The world would lap it up. And all of it happened in a council house in North London. The kind of place you walk past without second thought, unless it starts looking back. The Hodgsons was just trying to keep their heads above water. Peggy, the single mum, holding it all together with coffee and stubbornness. 4 kids, 4 mouths to feed, 4 reasons not to break. Margaret Hodgson, about 13 years old. Janet Hodgson, 11. Johnny Hodgson, around 10. And little Billy, about 7 years old. But some decided her youngest daughter Janet would make a fine target. It begun small, like it always does. Knocks and scrapes. The sort of noises you chalk up to bad plumbing or an old building stretching in its sleep. But the knocks grew teeth. They came sharper, louder. They followed you, room to room, like they'd had you scent. August 30th, 1977. The real crack in the dam. The kids was drifting into sleep when Peggy heard it. A banging, heavy and mean, hammering through the house. She charged upstairs ready to wring someone's neck. Janet swore it weren't them. Said Billy's bed had been going funny, sliding round like it had somewhere to be. The next night, Peggy didn't need no one to tell her. She saw it. The chest of drawers sliding across the room as if some invisible had grabbed it. She shoved it back. It came forward again, stubborn as a drunk in a boozer fight. The second time she pushed it, it wouldn't budge. Something or someone was holding it in place.
Told her what was going on, and she see it for herself. She see the chest of drawers moving, and when she tried to push it back, she couldn't. She realised then that something wasn't right. And I think we was awake all that night, all of us, and there was bits and bobs going on the wall, and strange little noises in the house, and no one was doing it. We couldn't make out what was going on. By the next day, my mum was exhausted. She was emotional, nearly a wreck, you know.
That was enough. Peggy grabbed the kids and laid it into the night, banging on the neighbour's door like her life depended on it. Vic Nottingham, the neighbour, was a contractor, no-nonsense sort of bloke. He understood how homes went together. He went in alone, but came out pale. Said he heard knocking that moved around the house with him. Couldn't pin it down. Couldn't explain it.
I went in there and I couldn't make out these noises. I went up the stairs and there was knocking on the wall. There was a knocking in the bedroom. I passed into the next bedroom and this knocking followed me. I was beginning to get a little bit frightened. Just couldn't make out what it was.
By 1 a.m, there was coppers in the Hodgson place. They heard the knocking too. Constable Carolyn Apes watched the chair start to shiver, then slide across the floor like it had somewhere to be. There was no wires, no slope, just movement with no end behind it.
Came off the floor, nearly a half inch, I should say, and I saw it slide off to the right, about 3.5 to 4 feet before it came to rest. I checked to see whether or not it could possibly have slid along the floor. I placed a marble on the floor to see whether or not the marble would go in the same direction as the chair did, and it didn't roll at all. I checked for wires under the cushion of the chair, and I could find no explanation at all.
Neighbours, coppers, then the press. The Daily Mirror sent a reporter, Douglas Bence, and a snapper, Graham Morris.
The news desk phone kept ringing with this man up in Enfield called Vic Nottingham.
I think the crunch came when the person on the phone, the other end, said, "Oh well, we've all seen this, including the police."
We drove up there in my car, the office car.
When we arrived, the mother was horrified.
They sat in that house for hours, nothing happening, waiting for a story that wasn't coming. Then the family came home and all hell broke loose. Lego bricks and marbles flew through the air like shrapnel. The reporter took a hit to the noggin. From there the story grew legs, and it grew sharper teeth. The press called in the Society for Psychical Research, the ghost hunting toffs. Among them was Morse Gross, a man who'd get far too close to this family, and far too deep into something that didn't want to be understood. And at the centre of it all was Janet Hodgson, 11 years old, laughed like a match being struck, and a shadow trailing her that no one could see, at least not at first.
I thought, this is very, very unlikely. Anyway, I kept my mind fairly clear and never went to that house. Went in. As soon as I got in, I could see everybody was very disturbed. The interesting thing here was that the mother and the children had not a clue what a poltergeist was.
So he said, well, look, you're not on your own, Mr. Crowson. He said, I'm going to make sure that you're not left on your own to feel frightened anymore. And she thanked him and she said, I'm sorry about it, Mr. Crowson. I just don't know what to do. She was very desperate.
A year before the walls of Green Street started whispering, Morris Gross's life had already been gutted. His daughter, also named Janet, she was gone. A sudden, senseless tragedy. Whatever drew him into that cramped North London house wasn't just a promise of proving something that science had left in the dark. He didn't see a haunted address. He saw a family circling the drain. A mother with no lifeline. Kids are really learning what it meant to stare into the night and not expect to blink. Morris came back within days, this time with press in tow. The Mirror sent hounds eager for a headline. It was 1:15 in the morning when the quiet snapped. A crash from the girl's room loud enough to make you forget how to breathe. They tore up the stairs and found the impossible. The girl was still dead asleep, but a chair had been hurled across the room like it had picked up by invisible hands with a grudge.
The family went to sleep and we waited to see if anything would happen.
Well, we've just heard a noise having come downstairs. We've just heard a noise upstairs. And the chair, which was standing by Janet's bed, appears to have moved.
The chair's been thrown 9 feet.
Well, I'm hoping I'm not getting the microphone shaking in my hand, because that was rather an unnerving experience.
I mean, we all know kids can fake being asleep, but it didn't look like that. It looked as though she had been asleep, and suddenly something had happened.
Morris didn't need no more convincing. This weren't creaky floorboards or bad wiring. This was something that needed watching, recording and understanding. That weekend, the Enfield haunting didn't just make the local gossip rounds. It was splashed across the front page of the Daily Mirror and buzzing through BBC Radio 4. The reporters what stayed the night saw it too. Chairs thrown, beds shaking like they was alive. For once, the witnesses weren't just pub talkers or thrill seekers. These was coppers, journos and blokes who made their living laughing at fairy tales, now trying to explain why the furniture was moving all on its own. The Society for Psychical Research decided Morris needed backup. Enter Guy Lyon Playfair, an author, an investigator with the kind of patience you only get from years chasing shadows. Gross and Playfair didn't just drop by a few times. They became fixtures in the home, logging hundreds of visits, pouring years into this house like it were a bottomless pit. And the pit gave back. Objects flying across rooms, knocking that followed you like a stray dog. But on Sunday, September 25th, the case opened its jaws wider. Peggy Hodgson lived just down the street from her brother, John Burkham, and his missus, Sylvia. That night, the tension in her home finally snapped. The family grabbed what they could and fled to John's. While brewing tea, Sylvia froze, watching a children's toy appear in midair, then crash against the counter. That were the question now. Was this thing bound to the house or to the people inside it? The activity didn't slow. If anything, it were feeding. And Janet, the young lass at the centre of it all, she was the one taking the brunt. School became impossible when sleep were a stranger. Peggy begged the council to relocate him, but the paperwork didn't move for ghosts. Maurice and Playfair helped to scrape together enough to take the kids to the seaside for a week. Sunlight, salt air and peace. And for a while the nightmare stayed behind. But the ocean couldn't keep it bound. The day they came back, the house seemed to inhale. Morris had been busy in their absence. He'd started talking to it. 1 knock for no, 2 knocks for yes. He recorded hours of these exchanges, questions about its life, its death, why it was still here. The answers were unnerving, not in what they revealed, but in the way they came.
Knock 1 for no and 2 for yes. Are you a male spirit? 1 for no and 2 for yes. 2. That's 2. You are a male spirit. Did you used to live in this house? You did. Was it more than 50 years ago? Yes. Did you die in this house? Did you pass on? You did pass on in this house. Now why are you here? Are you unhappy? You're not unhappy. But why are you here? Is it because you want to give us a special message? No. You don't want to give us a special message. Are you having a game with me? Oh, right. As I asked the question, are you having a game with me? It's through the cardboard box and the pillow right at my face. Well, thank you very much. That was a very good answer.
It weren't just answering. It were toying with him, mocking him. The kind of game where you're not sure if you're the one asking the questions or the one being studied. Saturday, November the 12th. The night didn't open with chaos. No screaming, no furniture flying in a storm of unseen hands. Just a single heavy thud. The kind what drops into your chest and leaves your pulse scrambling to catch up. Janet was on the floor, sprawled like a rag doll tossed aside. The bed behind her was undisturbed, as if it hadn't been part of the crime. It looked less like she'd fallen and more like she'd been evicted from sleep itself, ripped out of the dream and abandoned in the waking world. Peggy had been running her own quiet investigation, notepads and pens stationed round the house like tripwires, waiting for something or waiting on someone to cross them. It didn't take long. She found one of the pads marked in a jagged alien scroll that didn't belong to any living hand. It read, "I will stay in the house. Do not read this to anyone, or I will retaliate." It weren't reaching out. It weren't trying to be understood. It was staking a claim. The following weekend, Janet's body betrayed her. A seizure tore through her, folding her up and dropping her into a medicated fog. The doctor left a sedative. The family tucked her in. Hours later, her uncle checked in on her, found her draped over a radio, limbs bent all wrong. head lolling at an angle that made you think of marionette strings cut mid-performance. From then on, Janet started turning up in strange places, unconscious and misplaced like an object left where it didn't belong. She became a piece of someone else's board, moved without her consent. Soon the drawings began. She made them in that thin, half-lit place between sleep and waking, a pencil scratching in quick, confident strokes. Weeks earlier, a medium had visited the house, sketching absent-minded spirals and vague symbols. Janet's hand took the trick and twisted it. Her pages filled with the language of nightmares, knives and blood, the cold precision of killing, arranged in ink and paper. December 3rd, 1977. 1 in the morning. What seemed to be Enfield's witching hour. Something had already happened upstairs. Morris was in the hall when he heard it, a sound that didn't fit. He opened the door and froze. Janet was sliding down the stairs, head first, her eyes closed, her limbs loose, still asleep, still in the grip of whatever was moving her.
Janet's asleep, and suddenly she's being dragged out of bed. She's dragged to the door opens on its own, she goes through the door, and we heard the commotion upstairs. We rushed up the stairs and caught her coming down the stairs head first.
Since Morris had made contact, the pace had changed. The air in the house felt charged, the focus sharper, and Janet was square in the crosshairs. And then it spoke. It began like a bad joke, barking, whistling, animal sounds thrown out like bait.
The barking here is quite extraordinary, actually.
We got a dog here.
I then said to it, as I said on the tape here, I then said to it, if you can whistle and bark and groan, then you can talk. And I asked it to actually say my name. Well, just a minute. We'll try again. I want you to call out my name. My complete name. Morris Gross. See if you can do that. Very good. Let me hear you say my name again. Come on, let me hear you say my name. No. Now that was the first time we heard the voice, and since then we've been hearing it again and again, and it's been getting louder and louder.
Without warning, a voice crawled out of Janet's throat, low and rough, like gravel soaked in smoke and dragged across wood. It called itself Joe. That was the moment the haunting stopped being just noise in the dark. It had found a way to speak, and now it wanted to be heard. The names kept changing, but the voice never did. It stayed the same, that same low, rough growl that didn't belong in an 11-year-old girl's throat. Morris kept prodding it, pushing it into a corner. With each session, the voice came back louder, like it was getting comfortable in the room. It shifted between mocking laughter and jokes that curdled the air, half childlike, half something else entirely. Days later, it came with a new name. Bill. Morris asked him how he died. The answer was cold and quick. Said he went blind, hit with a hemorrhage in a chair in the living room. The skeptics called it coincidence until they found the son of Bill Wilkins. He used to live there. His father had died exactly that way, in that exact spot, while his wife was out shopping. The more they dug, the more the house seemed to dig back.
I had an hemorrhage and I fell asleep. I died in a chair in the corner downstairs.
But it describes exactly how it's exactly what happened. He died in the chair, down in the living room. My mum popped out to the shop for 10 minutes. When she came back, he was dead.
Determined to prove it to the world, automatic cameras clicked every quarter of a second, pulling time apart frame by frame. They caught a famous shot, Janet in mid-air, a body arched, mouth frozen in silent scream. To believers, it was levitation. To the skeptics, it was a single jump. 3 decades later, the photos still divide the room. And the levitations were far from over. In another test, they asked the spirit to lift her. The objects moved first. A cushion found on the roof like it fled the building. The voice said they couldn't be in the room for the real trick though. But several witnesses outside claimed the show went on without them. A woman said she saw toys hit the window. Then she saw Janet float past it sideways, as if the air itself had turned against gravity. The baker's roundsman saw her too, drifting, bumping the glass, with books and toys trailing her like debris in a current. Across the street, a lollipop lady, Hazel Short, she swore she saw Janet rising and falling in front of the window, as if the house was deciding whether to keep her or throw her out.
I saw Janet laying flat, and she was floating. She was going up and down in front of the bedroom window.
By Christmas time, the haunting had sharpened its teeth further. The family's goldfish turned up dead. Bill Wilkins took the blame. On Christmas Day, their pet Bodgie joined the fish. That same day, they say a curtain wound itself round Janet's throat. Peggy found her clawing at the fabric just in time. The messages got uglier. The bathroom wall wore profanity smeared in human excrement. Another note, assembled from strips of tape, read, "I am Fred." And then there was the thing Peggy swore she saw. The lower half of a man dressed in old trousers climbing the stairs. No head, no torso, just legs, walking like they still knew where they was going. Reporters kept coming back. They was like moths to a broken street lamp, drawn in by the flicker, never mind what was lurking in the dark. BBC Scotland even rolled their cameras inside, capturing Janet's throat conjuring that gravel rough voice, the sound of a grown man stuffed inside of the small frame of an 11-year-old girl. The mics also caught something else. The knocks and the groans, the baying that seemed to come from every bleeding direction at once. 8 months in, April comes and Maurice Gross and Guy Playfair finally step away. They wasn't quitting, just catching their breath. They tell Peggy keep a record while they're gone. By the time they're back, she's filled pages, over 150 incidents. That's when the big names came calling. Ed and Lorraine Warren. They only stayed brief in June of '78. Their involvement just a footnote compared to what Maurice and Guy was living through. The skeptics had their ammo. The voices could be fake, they said. The levitations just jumps caught in mid-frame. And yeah, there were moments when the kids pulled tricks, claiming it was the ghost for a laugh. Even Maurice admitted that, but he swore it didn't account for the bulk of it. The things the coppers and the journos and the trained investigators had seen with their own eyes. One of the strangest things Maurice did to test Janet's voice was stuffing her mouth with water, then taping it shut and still hearing Bill come through, low and steady.
There was occasions when I'm sure, thinking back, that Maurice would take my mouth up or fill my mouth with water.
I got her to take some water in her mouth, taped over her mouth, and it still spoke. And then I said, all right, and I took the tape off, and she spat the water out.
Maurice argued no human throat could keep up that rasp for hours without snapping.
They're certainly not very good ventriloquists. We have had tests of them to see whether they can ventriloquize. They can't. To keep up this particular type of voice for any length of time without damage to the vocal cords is absolutely impossible. I mean, there must be some hoarseness attached to it. But don't forget, these children don't do this for a couple of minutes or so. They do it for lengths of periods up to 3 hours, and without any hoarseness or sore throats whatsoever.
It got to the point Peggy was running out of moves. Janet's health was on the line, mentally and physically. She was sent to stay with nuns for a bit, but the real test came when she was admitted to Maudsley Institute of Neuropsychology in South London. They ran her through the machines, the tests, the questions. They found no mental illness, no neurological disorder, and while she was there, nothing. No voices, no flying objects, no haunting. When Maurice asked her why, she didn't hesitate. Said the thing needed the other people in the house, needed their energy, Their presence. Without them, she said it starved.
All poltergeist cases, they eventually start to diminish. And I personally, and this is my own opinion, is that they start to diminish because the stress started to reduce.
Even though they died down and they stopped, I always felt there's always something there. I don't know about now, but while Mum was there was always something there.
6 weeks later, Janet comes home. The quiet lasts 30 minutes. She walks in the kitchen and sees a boy standing there clear as day. And just like that, the house had its grip back. They tried mediums before, priests, nothing stuck. Then Guy Playfair brings in a Dutch medium, Dono Gemelig Mailing. Bloke didn't speak a lick of English, but he goes upstairs into the kid's bedroom alone. No one knows what he did up there. But when he comes down, they all say something had changed. The activity didn't stop, but the violence started bleeding out of it. The medium claimed the haunting was tied to a 24-year-old woman. He didn't know who. Morris couldn't ignore the coincidence. His daughter Janet had died at the exact age, a year before the Enfield case began. By autumn, a priest had blessed the house. The activity shrank again, a wounded thing retreating in the dark corners. But according to the Hodgsons, it never really left. In 1979, the Warrens returned, caught more strange evidence, but the force weren't what it used to be. The family remained long after the events. Janet's mum, Peggy, stayed until her death in 2003. She never moved out, not once, even with all that went on in them walls. When she passed on, her boy Billy stayed on in the gaff for a bit, and the folks what moved in after, they said they felt a bit funny now and then. Some reckon they was being watched, or that something was lurking around, but it weren't nothing like the racket back in the late 70s, nah. Peggy Hodgson were right jittery about young Janet coming back home after the hospital she were. Said she was scared the whole palaver would kick over again, like letting the devil back through the bleeding door. And Janet herself, years later, she admitted plain as day, me mum didn't really want me home, 'cause I was trouble. I was part of the problem. Sad, isn't it? A kid feeling like the curse, following her around. School wasn't no sanctuary neither. The whole time the kids are calling her ghost girl, whispering, laughing, pointing fingers. Every step she took, the Enfield haunting followed close behind. By the time she was 16, she had enough. She left home, got married out of nowhere, bolted from the house and from the name stuck on her. But even then, there weren't no peace. She grew distant from her family, proper estranged, barely speaking to them, not even when she were older. In the years that followed, cameras kept poking round, papers wanting a quote, the telly wanting a story. Janet gave them what she could, but it was never simple. Some days she owned up to fibbing here and there, mocking about with the reporters. Other days she swore on her life most of it were dead real. She'd say things like, the poltergeist weren't evil, not really. He just wanted to be a part of the family, like it was some stray dog trying to get in, out of the rain. Truth be told, the whole thing scarred her. The name Ghost Girl stuck like a brand weighing her down all through her life. She left young, tried to outrun it, but it clung to her boots all the same. Even as a grown woman, Janet stayed torn in two. On one hand, admitting to a few hoaxes, on the other, swearing something unholy had been in the house. And maybe that's the cruelest bit. Not even she could ever be sure where the tricks ended and the terror began. She says there are gaps in her memory from those years, blackouts in the middle of chaos. Morris never stopped believing. Up until his death in 2006, he guarded the case like a copper who'd never close his file. Whatever it was in that house, it left a mark too deep to fade. Coppers, mediums, journos, priests, paranormal investigators, all of them telling pieces of the same story, one that began in an ordinary North London home and became one of the most documented hauntings in history.
I know, from my own experiences, it was real. And it did happen.
Alright folks, let's talk about it. The Enfield Poltergeist is the name typically assigned to this case or event, one of the most famous and most documented paranormal cases in modern history. Some see this as the spiritual Roswell of the United Kingdom, Enfield being the place, and Poltergeist being what people thought it to be. The word poltergeist gives us a clue as to what makes this kind of phenomena so unique. It comes from the German polter, meaning to make noise, to knock, to crash, and Geist, meaning ghost or spirit. Put it together, the word paints a picture of a noisy ghost. But unlike the way we often think of a ghost, a wandering spirit of the dead bound to a place, the poltergeist has a reputation all its own in both folklore and psychical research. Poltergeists don't linger quietly in the background or drift through the hallways in sorrow. They announce themselves with chaos. Reports often describe loud and repetitive knockings, violent bangs that move from room to room, or sounds that mimic footsteps and fists pounding against the guts of the house. Objects are said to move, fly, or levitate. Furniture can shift and tremble as if shoved by unseen hands. What's more unnerving is that the disturbances rarely stop at the environment. The activity often fixates on a person rather than a location, a living force or agent who seems to attract the phenomenon like a lightning rod. This is what sets a poltergeist apart from a typical haunting according to paranormal enthusiasts. Where a haunting clings to a house or a piece of land, the poltergeist attaches itself to someone inside, most often a child or adolescent caught in a season of vulnerability. That's why in the case of the Enfield Poltergeist, all eyes turned to Janet Hodgson. 11 years old, restless, and already weighed down with more hardship than many adults, she became the epicenter of the storm. Whatever it was that rattled the walls of 284 Green Street, it seemed to choose Janet as its preferred target, making her the focus of one of the most famous and disturbing cases in modern paranormal history. The moment we set foot in Enfield, I'm sure you felt a strong sense of déjà vu. This case certainly has a lot in common with the one we just spent 2 weeks unpacking with Esther Cox in Amherst, Nova Scotia. Both about a young woman at the epicenter of something loud, aggressive, and deeply unsettling. Just like Esther in that little Nova Scotian town, Janet Hodgson, along with her mother and siblings, found themselves under siege by a barrage of loud banging and knocking. Furniture that moved on its own, objects flying through the air, and yes, inexplicable messages appearing out of nowhere. Now the delivery system for those messages were a little different in Enfield. In Amherst, the mysterious writing appeared in plaster on the wall, or turned up on paper through Esther's hands, in plain sight via psychography. In Enfield, it got, creative. Some mysteriously appeared scrawled on scraps of paper, others were, redecorated straight onto bathroom walls using, number 2. And I don't mean number 2 pencils, I mean straight number 2, the kind of graffiti you really don't want to clean up. Where these cases truly part ways is in the way the so-called spirits communicated. The entities tormenting Esther allegedly spoke to her. Messages whispered, words dropped into her mind, things she repeated to others. The entities in Enfield, they didn't just talk to Janet, they talked through Janet. Imagine it, an 11-year-old English girl, and from her mouth comes this gravelly, defiant male voice. The kind of voice you'd expect from a tough old bloke who spent a lifetime down the pub, not from a kid in pigtails. Witnesses swore it was unnerving to hear in person. Once you listened to the recordings, maybe you found it hard to disagree. Maybe you weren't convinced. Some are most convinced by the test Morris mentioned when he put water in Janet's mouth and then taped it. And then he claimed she could still do the creepy voice. Biggest problem with that is, with all the interview footage we have available with the creepy voice, why didn't they do the test on camera that could have proved it indefinitely? The first of many unanswered questions, to be sure. In any case, both Esther and Janet claim they were conduits for multiple personalities. Esther's list got long, 5, maybe 6 distinct entities, male and female, all supposedly spirits of different people. We've addressed that, trust we will address it again here. Janet's number was smaller, about 3 or 4 male voices in total, and countless strange noises. But the twist is, according to witnesses, those different Enfield voices weren't actually that different. The same sound, the same timbre, only the mannerisms, the personality quirks, and the choice of words seemed to shift. It's almost like instead of changing the channel, you were watching the same program with a slightly different host. Excuse me, Toaster Boy. May I interject? Sure, what's up, Vinny? I feel like you're skipping over a ton of stuff, to be honest. Ouch, my bad, you're probably right. I'm really trying to avoid another 2-parter, but I suppose I am getting ahead of myself. Let's rewind. With Esther and Amherst, we said it was hard to pin where it all began. That's not as difficult in Enfield. As I said before, it began with a Ouija board. We've talked about these things at length before, and we have so much other stuff to talk about. Suffice it to say, these things are demonic tools of divination. It doesn't matter if you bought it in a toy aisle, what matters is intent. The intended purpose of those stupid pieces of wood with letters on them is to attempt communication with the dead. If you fear God and believe the Bible, you know this is entirely forbidden. If you don't, there are tons of examples out there for you that these open doors that leave people tormented for years. If the events in Enfield are to be believed, the Ouija board most certainly could have been where the girls cracked the door open for the Kingdom of Darkness. And yes, I said girls because both of Peggy's daughters experienced strange things, but the most extreme and bizarre things centered around Janet and not Margaret. Like Amherst and other poltergeist cases, strange and inexplicable noises could be found throughout the house, and when they tried to track it down, it would come from somewhere else, and then sometimes it came from everywhere. Scrapes, booms, bangs, the usual, and then in increasing measure. From the bangs comes the moving of furniture and other household items. Again, though separated by a century, the phenomena followed a similar pattern. According to the Hodgsons, Peggy found herself wrestling with a chest of drawers. We haven't yet discussed what I believe them to be ontologically, but we've established in the past that spiritual entities interacting with the physical world has happened and is well within the realm of possibility. After the chest incident, this is where other adults got involved and confirmed some of the strange occurrences. We heard from Vic, the contractor, who said he couldn't make sense of the noises coming from the house. So troubled by these noises, it was he who contacted the authorities. The cops showed up, and they too report strange occurrences. We heard directly from Constable Carolyn Heaps that she witnessed a chair move entirely on its own. She investigated to see if there was a logical explanation for what she saw. She found none, even laying down a marble to see if it would roll along the path of the chair, but it didn't move. Shortly after, we have the guys from the press. The Daily Mirror shows up. Douglas Bentz was a journalist, and Graham Morris was the photographer who would later take all the famous pictures associated with the case. For the longest time, nothing was happening. But when the family returned, these men claimed that small objects like marbles and Lego bricks started flying through the air.
Oh, come on, please don't tell me you're going to believe these two. You know they're just trying to sell papers. There wasn't nothing going on in that boring little burrow, so these two were dying for a story. Not to mention, there were 3 other kids that could have been chucking toys and ducking behind furniture and around corners.
Yeah, great idea. Let's blame the traumatized kids for initiating Lego guerrilla warfare with the Daily Mirror. Calm down, you two. I agree that Bentz and Morris are the most questionable witnesses because they stand to gain the most from the story. And it was boring at the time, so they were thirsty. But we've already had several other adults, including police officials, who had seen things prior to the toys flying. So let's not throw out their testimony right away.
Well, you certainly can't believe that Morris Gross was a reliable witness or a reliable investigator in all this.
Calm down, Doc. We haven't even gotten there yet, and you're already attacking the man. Morris Gross was the first member of the Society for Psychical Research who got involved in the case, and he was certainly the one that was the most involved and enthralled with the case. I'll be honest, knowing his backstory and observing him and listening to hours of recordings and interviews with him, he does leave me torn. I don't get Ed Warren vibes at all, we'll get to him later to be sure, nor do I get Walter Hubble vibes from last week. Morris Gross clearly wasn't seeking fame, at least I don't think so. But he did have selfish interests in this case that maybe even he wasn't aware of. Morris Gross's presence in the Enfield case wasn't just about science or investigation. I think it was very personal for him. Like we said only a year before the first knocks echoed through Green Street, Morris had buried his own daughter. Her name, by eerie coincidence, was also Janet. That loss left a wound he never recovered from, and many believe it shaped everything about the way he handled the Hodgsons. Instead of approaching the family with the cold detachment of a researcher, he walked into that house as a grieving father who suddenly found himself protecting another girl named Janet. The bond was instant with the new fatherless Hodgson girl. Her parents divorced and her dad bailed. That trauma, coupled with messing with a Ouija board, most certainly was the perfect recipe for spiritual turmoil. Anyways, the danger with the mess with his personal life and hers was that it blurred the lines between objectivity and empathy. Where other investigators might have pulled back, questioned harder, or dismissed trickery, Morris often leaned in, willing to defend the Hodgson children fiercely against skeptics. His grief made him relentless. He practically moved into the house, logging hundreds of visits when most researchers only stayed a few days. The commitment gave the Hodgsons a father figure in the middle of their chaos, someone who refused to abandon them. But it also raised questions. Was he seeing the case clearly, or was he so desperate for meaning after his daughter's death that he was willing to accept any sign of the supernatural as proof? Even Guy Lyon Playfair, the help sent to back him up from the Society for Psychical Research, he greatly respected Morris, but he later admitted Morris sometimes jumped too quickly to conclusions. To some, that made him gullible. To others, it made him human. Either way, the tragedy he carried into the house became part of the story, shaping not just how the case was recorded, but how it is remembered. Some go as far as saying he desperately hoped that this Janet could communicate with the dead, because if she could, maybe others could as well. And maybe that meant he could one day speak with his Janet one more time. This is the first place I'm going to get rather preachy. Sadly, this is what drives a lot of people into divination, into occult and New Age beliefs. Even sadder is this is what keeps many people from coming to the truth. I know folks that have heard the truth of the gospel, but they reject it, not because they have good reason, but because someone they loved died outside of Christ. And if Jesus is who he claimed to be, then the good news about Christ doesn't feel so good because it means they won't be reunited with the ones they loved. I'm not going to candy coat it and compromise the gospel. Jesus said in John 14:6, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Since Jesus really lived, really died, and he really rose from the dead, he's the only authority on the afterlife we can trust, and he declared the only way to heaven was through him alone. I know the pain of losing a loved one who didn't have Christ, but I urge you, don't turn to demonic divination and open dark doors into your life, and certainly don't reject the truth of the gospel out of a misplaced desire to see your loved ones again. In hell there is no family reunion. It is a place of isolation and weeping and gnashing of teeth. You can't change anyone else's fate after they die, and the Bible forbids attempts to contact them. This isn't dress rehearsal, folks. This is the show. There is no second chance. There's no purgatory, no place where you can go to be perfected or prayed out of later. That is a demonic idea foreign to Scripture. I urge you, repent and believe while you still draw breath. And if you are a Christian, a follower of Jesus, then you have a responsibility to proclaim the glorious gospel of the one who defeated sin, death, and the grave. Start with those who you love who are living, and then continue to the ends of the earth to any who will listen. Now getting back to the case. The press would return this time in greater numbers.
Hey, ain't that when they all get spooked by the chair that crashed itself into the ground?
Are you serious? I told you can't trust the press. They need stories. They need hype because that's what sells. Yeah, they heard a loud bang upstairs. By the time they got there, the girls had plenty of time to rush back into bed and look asleep. We've all done it.
Sadly, I'm going to have to side with the doc on this one too. I can't tell you how many times I faked being asleep when my parents checked on me. I'd be playing video games past my bedtime and hear footsteps. I'd hit the power button and slam my face into the pillow and look like I was in La La Land for hours already. I think this is pretty weak sauce.
Okay, fine, but it don't discredit the other stuff from the more reliable witnesses, does it?
Fair point. No, it doesn't. Morris nor the press were critical of that evening, and the story grew. Even hit BBC Radio by then. Fast forward to a night in September when Peggy would involve her brother and his family. The occurrences apparently flared up and they fled down the street to his place. This is when toys allegedly started flying there too, according to Peggy's sister-in-law.
Family always covers for family. Of course they would affirm it.
Doc, we're not dealing with the Sopranos here. We're dealing with the Hodgsons. Just because they were related don't mean they're automatically lying for each other.
Another fair point, Vinny. The list of adult witnesses to strange phenomena is increasing, and this night also demonstrated that the phenomenon wasn't linked to the house, but to the family, or at least a member of the family, so it would seem. Peggy tried to get them out of the house. The local council refused the request, not that it would have made any difference necessarily. But to give them a break, the gentleman from the Society of Psychical Research sent them on a trip. According to Guy Lyon Playfair's account in the work entitled This House is Haunted, Morris Gross stayed behind in the Hodgson home while Peggy took the kids for a seaside break that the SPR helped pay for. During that window, Morris carried out some of his knock twice for yes, one for no sessions in the empty house. He claimed he received direct responses from the entity when he asked questions about its life and death. We listened to one of those sessions. From the sounds of it, an intelligent spirit responded.
The family could have been faking the taps.
The family wasn't even there, bro.
Vinny's got you this time. There were tests done without the family present.
Well, all we have are some stupid audio recordings. For all we know, he could have been making the tapping noises or conspiring with other members of the little society over there.
Now, let's be fair, Doc. We don't have evidence to confirm it was a spirit, but we also don't have any evidence that Morris falsified any evidence with SPR. The young girls will later admit to fooling around and twisting the truth at times, yes. But they're not even there right now, and we have no reason to question Mr. Gross's integrity here. We can and should ask a question, though, about this practice that we've seen for several weeks now. Should a Christian participate in these little sessions, asking spirits questions and then saying, tap twice for yes and once for no? I'm going to tap once for you and let you know the answer is no. I don't believe Christians should participate in these practices because it's no different than whipping out a Ouija board. It's simply another form of divination. What's the goal? You're seeking to commune with the dead for information. Is that permitted by the Word of God? No, it's categorically condemned by His Word. Because you're opening doors. And as we've seen, you can get answers, but you're going to get them from deceiving spirits bent on not only distraction, but destruction.
Wait a minute. I just thought of something. I thought the crazy stuff was tied to the girl, not to the house.
That's a good question, but nothing says that the spirit has to be formally tied to anything. Traditional poltergeist lore says the occurrences are linked to a person, seen as focus agent theory. And to be fair, the majority of the stuff in Enfield was connected to Janet. But the Kingdom of Darkness doesn't have to follow the made-up rules concerning poltergeists. Like we saw last week, the spirits that torment the children of Adam can come in and out of empty vessels as they please. Now, one of the scariest occurrences would happen November 12th. That's the one where Janet is said to have been thrown from her bed. Can't be proven either way, much like the chair on the night the press was hanging out. We also touched on the notepads that Peggy had left around doing her own testing. Apparently notes were found on some. An example of this was,
I will stay in the house. Do not read this to anyone or I will retaliate.
Very threatening, but in all fairness, I can read the doctor's mind on this one. This note could have been written by anyone else at any time that they were alone with these notepads.
But couldn't the spirit could have used Janet, automatic writing style or something?
Though this is within the realm of possibility, no one knows who wrote it. And if someone saw Janet writing it, how could you prove it was the spirit at that time and not a preteen pulling a prank? So I'm not super convinced by the random notes either, not even the one sprawled with poo in the bathroom. Any one of the children could have written the vulgar word for crap on the bathroom wall, which was the message, by the way. The witnesses also talked about Janet showing up at weird places at weird times. Passing out somewhere doesn't require supernatural explanations. And even though doctors would later rule out neurological issues in the girl, this was a very traumatic, high-stress time in her life. And everyone knows that stress can do crazy things to our bodies, especially when you're young.
All right, get to the drawings. Didn't she automatic draw something?
Oh yeah, I hate this part. Janet did really draw creepy stuff, but all this proves is trauma, not the supernatural. What I hate most is that she was mimicking garbage that she was picking up from the mediums that were in and out of the house. So in a terrifying way, perhaps she was opening herself up to be used as a vessel because that's precisely what the mediums did. This is a dangerous and foolish thing on her part, but even more dangerous and foolish on the parts of the adults going in there and opening more demonic doors for themselves and the family. If there were no spirits in the house to start, the presence of mediums doing these dumb dark deeds most certainly could have drawn them in like flies to excrement. Speaking of more demonic doors potentially being opened, December is when things got really creepy. The night of the 3rd is when Morris saw Janet coming down the stairs, Reagan Exorcist style.
Totally could have been the little girl acting out again.
True, but if I'm seeing that, I'm getting out Psalm 91 and I'm throwing some anointing oil at her. After that creepy experience is when we start hearing about sounds and voices coming through Janet. First the whistling, then the weird barking. Could be demonic, could also be a broken little girl wanting attention. But when the voices start naming themselves is when the case takes on a whole new dimension. At the start of our analysis, we pointed out that the number of spirits that claimed to speak through Janet was about 3 or 4 male voices. But the twist was that, according to witnesses, those different Enfield voices weren't actually that different at all. They had the same sound, the same timbre, but the mannerisms, the personality quirks, and the choice of words seemed to shift.
I find this to be one of the most ridiculous aspects, and this was one of the first things that stood out to me. These so-called voices Janet claimed, they all sounded basically the same. Now, if she were really channeling 3 or 4 different fellers from beyond the grave, wouldn't you expect a little more variety? Different pitches, different speech patterns, something, maybe even different accents. Even normal weirdos can bust out a few different accents.
Hey.
Instead, what do we got? We got some gravelly growl just swapping out some slang and acting like it's a new character. That tells me we're not dealing with multiple entities. We're dealing with one voice, Janet's, and she's just good at putting on a show.
Wait a minute, Doc. You're missing the bigger picture. Maybe it was the same voice because it was the same spirit, one main operator running the whole show. It just threw on a different mood depending on what it wanted. Angry one minute, sarcastic the next, but underneath, same personality, same presence. That's exactly what you would expect from something intelligent, something playing the long game. You don't send the whole cast if one actor can do the parts.
Except that's not how evidence works, Vincent. You can't just say, it's all the same because it's the same spirit. That's circular reasoning, buddy. And it ignores the fact that she had every opportunity to perfect one voice that she could do for hours at a time without wrecking her throat.
I hear where you're both coming from. I did find it suspicious that all the entities, Joe, Bill, Fred, and some sources mention a Harry, all sounded the same. But then I realized a single spirit could be acting deceptively and simply toying with her, claiming to be different people.
Or you could use the smart side of your brain and realize it was Janet doing the toying around.
Rude? Maybe his suspenders gave him a wedgie. You're probably right, Vinny. And Doc, not everything spoken through Janet was vague-sounding nonsense either.
Are you telling me you're going to believe a lying little girl who wanted attention?
Man, he really must have spilled coffee on his crotch this morning. I agree with that, too. Of all these things that were spoken by these so-called voices, it's Bill Wilkins that I just can't ignore.
Thank you, that's what I've been saying. Bill Wilkins ain't just some made-up name like Fred or Harry. While using that creepy voice, the girl described how he died. He went blind, had a hemorrhage, keeled over in a chair right there in the house. And wouldn't you know it, years later, his son confirms that's exactly how his dad went out. Now you tell me, how's an 11-year-old supposed to know that? She's not exactly hanging out at the local archives.
Oh, please. That information could have been picked up anywhere. Overheard in the neighborhood, repeated gossip, maybe even suggested by an adult without realizing it. Kids pick up things like sponges, Vinny. Just because she repeated a detail that later proved accurate doesn't mean it came from a ghost. It means that she's a sharp listener with a flair for the dramatic.
Or it means the spirit was speaking through her and telling the truth. You can smear all you want, Doc, but that one detail lines up too neat to be brushed off.
I do admit that's where Enfield gets a little sticky for me. Most of the voices sound like vague taunts, like Janet was just hamming it up for the investigators. But when she, or it, calls itself Bill Wilkins and describes the hemorrhage in the chair, that hit a little different because Bill wasn't just a name pulled out of thin air. He was a real person that really lived in that real house.
Oh great, so you're saying we got a dead man's voice coming out of an 11-year-old girl's mouth?
That's not what I'm saying. Tying this back to our discussion last week, this could be just as simple as a spirit, a Yiddioni, speaking through Janet, a knowing one, an intelligent demonic entity wanting to cause pain and confusion, but throwing out just enough truth to suck everyone into the demonic con going on. Which finally leads us to the ontological discussion. I don't think we've plainly answered the question, what is a poltergeist? This is not a biblical word or concept. It's a German term that means noisy ghost, but it is simply a modern term used to describe certain phenomenon associated with demonic spirits like the Yiddioni or the Ove that we talked about last week and way back in episodes 5 and 6 and probably a few other times at that.
Wait a minute. With all due respect, you're telling me that was a demon running a con? That's what you said last time. If it was just some devil playing games, why drop details nobody knew? Why say clear as day, I went blind, had a hemorrhage, and died in my chair downstairs? That wasn't vague mumbo-jumbo, that was a man describing his last breath. Didn't they track down his family and they said that's exactly how Bill Wilkins died? I thought you said we gotta avoid the whole devil in the gaps thing. You said yourself that a spirit could come back if God allowed. Why couldn't he allow Bill to come back and speak through Janet? What if this is proof that the dead sometimes reach back across the divide, even if it makes the living squirm? Maybe it don't fit neat into your little categories, but to me it screams one thing. We weren't just listening to Janet Hodgson. We was listening to Bill Wilkins, the man who died in that house and wasn't quite done talking.
Vinny, that's exactly the trap I'm talking about. The devil doesn't care if he feeds you a lie or the truth, so long as it leads you to the wrong conclusion and down the wrong path. There are conflicting reports concerning the death of Bill Wilkins, but assuming the info was fully accurate, if an evil spirit wanted to convince everybody it was old Bill Wilkins, what better way than to drop a verifiable detail? That's how successful deception works. One true thing to hook you, a dozen lies to reel you in. We also can't ignore that, if true, all we have is this one unique verifiable fact. If revelation was the goal, why so little, and why so useless? Several spirits were alleged to have spoke and even appear in various forms during the time of the haunting. Where's their backstories? Where's the additional information? And you're right, I said sometimes God allows the dead to appear. We see it with Samuel and King Saul when the king went to go see the witch of Endor, or Moses in the New Testament on the Mount of Transfiguration. But in every biblical example where the dead show up, it's for God's purposes. Why would God permit Bill Wilkins to come through the veil simply to curse a family with profanity, thrown Lego bricks, levitation, and bathroom graffiti spelled out in human waste? That doesn't sound like Bill Wilkins coming back for some noble, unfinished business like the New Agers would have us believe. That sounds like something darker dressing up in his skin. So no, I don't buy that this was Bill's ghost having a chat through Janet. It's far more likely it was a demonic masquerade, the same voice, same presence, just wearing a dead man's name to stir up confusion. But what if the darkest stuff wasn't Bill? For weeks we've been talking about spirits. Multiple spirits can show up at the same time, right? Or even in the same place, even in the same person. That's what you said. Couldn't Bill show up all harmless and another spirit be the one chucking furniture, causing all the terror and the doo-doo writing? I can see you're not going to let this go. And this is typically a place where my non-Christian listeners disagree with me the most, and even some of the professing Christian ones. Let's say for a second Bill actually did show up in the house, his spirit that is. When God allowed Samuel to come up from Sheol, Samuel's spirit showed up and spoke to Saul directly. This is important, notice. He did not enter the medium and speak to Saul through her. When God lets a human spirit return to this plane, they interact directly. Whether that's Samuel in the Old Testament or Moses in the New. There is no biblical precedent for a normal human spirit to take possession of a living human being. Fallen angelic beings can. We see this with Satan possessing Judas, see Luke 22 or John 13. And the disembodied spirits of dead Nephilim can also possess, which is what I believe we see throughout the gospel accounts, but you're free to see them as fallen angels if you want to cling to tradition. But what if Bill used her like a puppet? Didn't she say in all the interviews that it was like the voices was coming from behind her? But Vinny, when you watch the clips, it's clearly her mouth doing all the moving. She's not operating like a Wi-Fi or Bluetooth speaker. Even when you think about your puppet analogy, a hand goes inside controlling the puppet. Spiritually speaking, that sounds a whole lot like demonic possession to me, and nothing more. Some mediums do this garbage willingly, which is evil and stupid. They think they're channeling human spirits, but if you open yourself up for something to come in, a human spirit is never going to be the one that jumps in your driver's seat. So what does all this mean when we drag it back to that little council house in Enfield? It means that if anything foreign was speaking through Janet Hodgson, it wasn't Bill Wilkins. And it sure wasn't some lost soul with unfinished business. And if we were to categorize poltergeists, we certainly would not say that they are or were ever fully human at any time. Noisy spirit is an appropriate title, but in Enfield it was not the spirit of a deceased human being. According to Scripture, there are no wandering human spirits looking for closure on this plane. There are only the redeemed in the presence of Christ and the unredeemed awaiting judgment. Which means what we're left with is deception, a masquerade. And that's exactly what makes cases like Enfield so dangerous. Not because a chair moved across the room or Lego bricks flew through the air, but because people heard a voice. They believed it was a dead man, and they built their beliefs around that. That's how lies spread. That's how people get distracted and deceived, pulled away from the truth. When Jesus cast out unclean spirits in the Gospels, they often shouted out names, even correct information. "We know who you are, the Son of God." But he silenced them because truth in the mouth of a liar is still a trap. The same thing could have been at play in Enfield. If a spirit actually did speak through Janet, the spirit most certainly would have known how Bill Wilkins died. But it didn't share that to help anyone. It shared it to build credibility, to convince a family, a neighborhood, and eventually the whole nation that they were talking to the dead, instead of recognizing they were staring down something far older and far darker. When evil demonic spirits do take possession of some poor soul in the Bible, taunting and mocking is a common theme. See Acts 19, the possessed man that brutally beat up some Jewish exorcists called the sons of Sceva. He provoked and mocked the men, attempting to cast him out. Now we've spent way too much time on Bill Wilkins, and though I hope it was helpful, we gotta move on to some of the other elements that make Enfield so famous. Given this is an audio format, I'm at a slight disadvantage. But if you're familiar with the Enfield case, you know one of the things that has made it world-renowned is the so-called photographic evidence. This is my least favorite part of the Enfield case.
Oh, I've been waiting for this.
I'm sure you have, Doc. If you Google it, hundreds of images are out there. It is probably the most photographed paranormal event in history. The most famous image is of Janet Hodgson caught mid-air, arms and legs bent, mouth open as if she's frozen in the middle of a screen. To the faithful, this is proof of levitation, a girl lifted by unseen hands. To the skeptics, it's nothing more than a snapshot of a kid jumping off a bed. These photos have divided minds since they were released. Believers point to the timing, the expressions, the witnesses who swore what they saw wasn't just jumping. Skeptics point to the angles, the limitations of 1970s cameras, and the fact that the kids were caught faking smaller things earlier on, so they might have gone for the big ones too. Doc, I know you've been waiting. What do you make of the photos?
Let's be real here. The so-called levitation photos are just pictures of Janet mid-jump, that's it. Kids jump on beds, kids fall off beds, sometimes kids scream while they're doing it. The camera snapped at the right time and boom, spooky poster material. If you actually look at the angles, her body posture screams jump, not float. Gravity was doing its job.
Doc, you gotta be kidding me. You think this girl rehearsed the Broadway routine just to trick the cameras? Eyewitnesses swore she wasn't jumping. They said she was dragged, tossed, even floated sideways across the room at times.
Then where are the shots where she's parallel to the ground like she's on some invisible stretcher? There ain't none. Just the stupid jumping pictures.
But it's not just the kids, Doc. You can't write off multiple adults, neighbors, reporters, coppers, all of them saying the same thing. What about the people from the neighborhood that saw Janet floating past windows?
Too bad. Conveniently, there ain't no pictures of them moments. Not to mention, eyewitnesses ain't always the most reliable thing out there, especially if they have something to gain. The press should be heavily scrutinized in this. As for the rest, well, people often see what they expect to see, especially when the press is watching and the house is already being called haunted. Throw in a girl struggling with her daddy leaving and a sleep-deprived family, a neighborhood buzzing with gossip, and the perfect recipe for exaggerations is right in front of you. The photos ain't proof, they're Rorschach tests. Believers see levitation, skeptics see jumping. Guess which one the evidence supports?
Evidence. Here you go again with evidence. You mean the little magnifying glass on the ruler routine? The fact is, Doc, if these things were silly jumps, why'd seasoned reporters, guys who went in ready to laugh the family off, why'd they come out shaking then?
I told you, reporters love a headline, Vinny. Ghost throws Lego sells more than kids play catch with bricks. And Graham Morris? Well, he's the photographer spending years defending those photos because it kept his name in the conversation. You call it evidence, I call it fighting for relevance.
Ooh, good burn. And good rhyme. Shut up, Toaster Boy. You both sound like guys who never sat in a room where stuff moves without a hand touching it. Those photos ain't just publicity. They're snapshots of a war nobody wants to admit was happening. And let me tell you, Doc, if you're laughing at the levitation, you're laughing in the devil's face, and he loves that. Because the moment you think that it's just kids jumping, he's already pulled the wool over your eyes.
All right, let's slow this down and take a serious look at the evidence, especially those photos that made Enfield so famous. Let me be clear. I, for one, believe levitation is totally within the realm of possibility. Talk more about that in the future. But I hate to say this, I lean toward the doctor when it came to the pictures in Enfield. I think by themselves they don't carry the weight people attribute to them. Skeptics have gone over them frame by frame, even splicing some of them together in sequence. I've seen these, and what they reveal looks less like levitation and more like a girl bouncing off her bed. And that matters because Janet wasn't just an 11-year-old girl. Another rarely discussed fact of this case is that she was a gymnast, and a good one. She had trophies and certificates on her bedroom wall, and the kind of body control and spring that would make jumping for a camera second nature. When you add in details like blankets conveniently folded the same way across multiple shots, as if scenes were staged and reshot, I can see why skeptics walk away from these images unimpressed. To them, it's less proof of levitation and more proof of kids clowning for attention. And though crudely stated, the doctor is also correct about Janet's mental state at the time. Her parents recently divorced, and her father bailed. This would be devastating for any kid. In walks a guy who just lost his daughter, also named Janet. He's trying to fill the void of his daughter. She's trying to fill the void of her father. She wants to please this guy, and if there's nothing special about her, supernaturally speaking, then he's out of the picture. So there's this pressure to produce results.
But even with the stuff the girls say they faked, they said they did it because it did happen when nobody was around, but they was worried nobody would believe them. So sometimes they faked it to get an audience so everybody will believe them.
I agree with you, Vinny, that the paranormal does have intelligence at work on the other side, making those of us who believe often look stupid. Something appears, it's there, but as soon as I get my camera ready, it's gone. Or, oh, it's clear, I get the picture and it's a blurry mess. As though whatever forces made them appear want to mock us. But I also agree that these human elements are extremely important and rarely discussed, and I don't care about being politically correct, so we discuss them here. Speaking of human elements, you mentioned it, Vinny, and the doc did earlier. There's no denying the Hodgson girls were caught faking things at points. Investigators admitted they filmed Janet bending spoons herself, setting up staged phenomena, even admitting later that some of it was for the investigators' benefit so the men wouldn't be disappointed if nothing happened. Depending on when you catch Janet telling it or retelling it, she says they faked maybe once or twice. Ask her again in another interview, she said they faked maybe 2% of the events. Other times, maybe more. That inconsistency is enough to make skeptics foam at the mouth and make a solid case saying, if you've been caught lying once, why should anyone trust the rest of what you're saying?
Boom, exactly. Well, that was a nice time. Let's wrap this thing up now.
Slow down. Here's where it gets complicated.
Oh, good night. Here you are with complicated.
If we dismiss all of it as fakery, we have to explain away not just the photos, but what Vinny pointed out, the sheer number of respectable adult witnesses. In this case, over 30 people outside the family claim to experience things in that house. Though reporters may have something to gain, what about the neighbors, like the Nottinghams? What about police officers, like Constable Heaps, seeing a chair levitate and move several meters? Skeptical relatives like the Burkhams down the street saying things, passers-by like the lollipop lady saying she saw objects not only hit the window, but Janet floated by on her back. We're not just talking about kids swapping ghost stories here. Again, we're talking about adults unrelated to the case, some journalists, others cops with no skin in the game, and a professional photographer, Graham Morris, who swore up and down for decades that what he captured wasn't just kids playing games. Some of these people went in expecting to debunk the Hodgsons, and they came out rattled. There are a lot of witnesses that attest to the phenomenon. The pictures, sadly in my opinion, do more harm than good as far as credibility is concerned.
Since you want to drag this out, how about you talk about the cultural part? This stuff wasn't happening in a vacuum.
Very true. Another good point, Doc. In the summer of '77, Britain was already steeped in ghost stories before Enfield ever made headlines.
Well, what are you talking about? Like the Exorcist movie? That came out in '73.
Well, there is that, Vinny. We can't ignore it. It was a global phenomenon in and of itself. But that same summer, the BBC aired a short-lived anthology drama called The Supernatural. It ran for 8 episodes between June and August, and in a country with only 3 television channels at the time, any primetime broadcast became a national talking point. Millions of households tuned in, and a program filled with haunting, spectral visitations, and eerie tales was no exception. The final episode, called Dorabella, went out on August 6th, just 3 weeks before the first disturbances at 284 Green Street. That story, like others in the series, revolved around uncanny events and restless spirits, planting vivid imagery of the paranormal into the minds of the viewers. So, when reports of poltergeist activity began pouring out of Enfield at the end of August, the public was already primed for it.
Come on, just because it was part of the zeitgeist don't mean it wasn't a poltergeist.
Ooh, very nice, Vinny. For those unaware, zeitgeist is another German term. This one means spirit of the time, and it refers to the collective attitude, mood, or outlook of people in a particular historical era. That is a fair point, but perhaps it was this show that made the girls curious about using the Ouija board. Though none of the episodes of the BBC show discuss that matter, some reports say their uncle got them a book around the same time period that mentioned Ouija boards. And all of these things coalescing quite possibly piqued their curiosity about communicating with the other side. Because of the success of movies like The Exorcist and that supernatural BBC show, newspapers found their readers eager, if not hungry, for tales of ghosts and strange forces. The overlap between what people had just seen on the television and what they were now seeing in the papers made the Enfield case explode into a cultural sensation almost overnight. This timing has led some researchers to suggest that Janet and Margaret Hodgson could have been influenced, whether knowingly or not, by the themes and imagery broadcast into their living room only weeks prior. And with nothing else of note going on at the time, it made journalists thirst for a story.
But what about those hotshots, the Warrens? Didn't they get involved in this haunting? Ain't there like a whole movie about this case showing how crazy things got?
Ooh, Vinny, I don't think pointing to the Warrens is a wise choice in this case. I've said before I have a love-hate relationship with them. I won't rehash it all here, but they had little to nothing to do with this case, and what we know of the time they were there, it wasn't good, nor was it helpful. When it comes to the Enfield haunting, the Warrens' actual role was far less heroic than later portrayals suggest. The Conjuring 2 portrays them at the center and frames them as heroes once again. In truth, their involvement was minimal, uninvited, and largely self-serving. For starters, Ed and Lorraine were never asked to come. They showed up unannounced, and Peggy Hodgson herself admitted she didn't want them in the house. Witnesses described their arrival as disruptive, with one neighbor recalling the mayhem that followed. Rather than being welcomed as rescuers, they were essentially turned away. Even when they managed to spend time inside, their contribution was negligible. At most, they were present for a total of 6 to 9 hours. Their activities amounted to a single 3-hour interview, taking the children out for a meal, and possibly one brief follow-up visit years later. Compared to the months of dedication shown by the Society for Psychical Research investigators, Morris Gross and Guy Lyon Playfair, the Warrens were little more than passing visitors. Both the family and the primary researchers later emphasized that the Warrens did not meaningfully help or resolve anything. Worse still, their motives seemed transparent from the get-go. According to accounts, Ed Warren bluntly told Gross and Playfair,
"We can make a lot of money out of this story."
That comment immediately raised suspicions among the SPR investigators, who saw the couple as opportunists. Neighbors John and Sylvia Burkham later recalled Ed's arrogance and obsession with money, describing him as rude and dishonest. Guy Playfair himself recounted how Ed once told him how much profit they could make from the case, which only caused Playfair to dismiss him outright. The Warrens also attempted to undermine the real investigators. Ed allegedly tried to turn the Hodgsons against Gross and Playfair, pushing to edge them out so that he and Lorraine could claim the story for themselves, which they later did anyway, which is why The Conjuring 2 even exists. This pattern was not unique to Enfield. Ed was known for trying to force out competing researchers in order to secure exclusive rights to sensational cases that could later be monetized. Their claims were not only opportunistic but often exaggerated. For example, there exists a lengthy interview tape in which Ed claimed to have recorded Janet describing marvelous wonders. Yet the girls later insisted they had no memory of ever giving such an interview, raising the likelihood that Ed had either distorted the event or fabricated parts of it. Within the SPR's own extensive records, hundreds of hours of documentation, the Warrens are barely mentioned, appearing only twice. Their supposed influence on the case was virtually non-existent. Crucially, they offered no genuine help to the Hodgsons. They didn't perform exorcisms, they never did those. They didn't solve the disturbances, and they didn't lessen the family's suffering in any measurable way. Their presence was not remembered for bringing relief, but for stirring up disruption. Yet in later years, they capitalized on Enfield heavily. They wrote about the case, folded it into their growing catalog of paranormal adventures, and most famously were rewritten into the center of the story of The Conjuring 2. Ironically, while the family had once been dismissive of the Warrens, their stance shifted after Hollywood got involved. In risking sounding like Dr. Wright, this was likely due, sadly, to compensation and other incentives. In the end, the Enfield haunting reveals a very different picture of Ed and Lorraine Warren than the film portrays. They inserted themselves into the case without invitation, were distrusted by those actually investigating, contributed nothing of value, attempted to sideline the real researchers, and became remembered more for greed and dishonesty than for genuine aid. Nevertheless, they later rebranded themselves as central heroes, profiting from a story in which their real role was virtually irrelevant. before moving on from the Warrens, we gotta talk about the film, The Conjuring 2. You guys know by now I'm not inherently against horror movies, but you also know that I'm not a huge fan of them either. The Conjuring 2 takes insane liberties with the Enfield case, starting with the involvement of the Warrens, or rather, the lack thereof. The Warrens, of course, are at the center of it all, though they had nothing to do with the case in real life. A creepy nun, a demon named Valak, shows up in the movie, later getting a spin-off. This never happened in Enfield, and we have pages of testimony and hours upon hours of interviews. Valak is a demonic entity used to tie the Conjuring verse movies together. It's based on a spirit that is referenced in grimoires like the Lesser Key of Solomon from the 17th century and the Pseudomonarchia Demonium from the 16th century. I'm considering doing an episode dedicated to this topic. If that's something you'd like for me to do, drop me a comment, let me know. The Crooked Man is purely fictional. There were alleged sightings of a spectral boy and the bottom torso of a man that Peggy says she saw. She attempted to follow the apparition, but it disappeared. The famous scene with all the crosses levitating and going upside down, well, that never happened either and is purely for the film. Anything in The Conjuring 2 that is truly connected to the Enfield case is exaggerated heavily and Hollywoodized to make it more entertaining, but the film's biggest offense is again that the Warrens are the saviors, and in reality, they did nothing. Alright, I get it. The movie's whack and the Warrens were awful, but just cause they embellished and they're shysters doesn't mean the whole case is a bust, right? No, not by itself, Vinny. The presence of the Warrens doesn't discredit the entire Enfield haunting. But when you look at the case closely, you can understand why it's so hotly debated even decades later. We can't deny the overwhelming impact that this case has had on the study of paranormal events, nor the serious impact it's had on pop culture. Regardless of how one feels about the case, the most tragic layer in all this is Janet herself. Whether she was faking, possessed, oppressed, or some mix of all of it, the aftermath scarred her life. Branded the ghost girl, bullied at school, estranged from her own family, and carrying the trauma of being the center of something she could never quite explain or escape. Even in later interviews, you can hear the ambivalence. Sometimes she insists it was all real, other times she admits they made parts up. Sometimes she says the spirit was just a lonely old man who wanted to belong, other times that it was something darker. Whatever the truth, the cost was steep. It's possible that this is not as simple as a hoax or haunting. What if, much like the Great Amherst mystery, those things aren't mutually exclusive? I'm saying it could have been both, once again, fakery mixed with the unexplainable, lies tangled with something that felt terrifyingly real. I think this is brilliant as an evil strategy to stir up confusion and contention. If it was all fake, no one would care. If it was all supernatural, it would be undeniable. The Enfield Poltergeist case is messy. Like all the best-known cases, it's tangled up with contradictions. A family under pressure, kids caught fibbing, investigators grieving their own losses, and yet still 30-plus witnesses who swore they saw things that no skeptic's shrug can explain away. So where does that leave us? Not with certainty, but with tension. A case where fakery and fear walked side by side. A story where grief and deception created the perfect storm for something darker to slip in unnoticed. That's why Enfield endures. Not just because of photos in midair or gravelly voices named Bill Wilkins, but because it exposes the razor-thin line between desperation and deception, between longing for answers and opening the wrong doors. And the greater danger, if we decide these voices were the spirits of the dead, then we're already deceived. Scripture tells us the dead are not wandering back to chat. They are either with Christ or awaiting judgment. The voices that mimic them are imposters. That's why the Apostle Paul warned that even Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. Truth mixed with lies is still poison. Morris Gross wanted to believe, maybe because believing meant he could imagine hearing his Janet one more time. And many today chase the same hope. Mediums, seances, ghost hunts. Not because the evidence is strong, but because of the ache of loss being stronger. Yet Jesus was blunt. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you take one thing away from Enfield, let it be this. The devil doesn't mind giving you a spectacle. He doesn't mind moving a chair or parroting a dead man's name. What he wants is your trust. He wants you building your hope on the wrong foundation. But there's only one voice that deserves your trust. The voice that walked out of the grave, the one who holds the keys of death and Hades. He doesn't knock on the walls to frighten, he knocks on hearts to save. So don't get lost in the noise of poltergeists, photos, and ghost stories. Fix your eyes on the risen Christ who has already silenced the grave, because in the end, that's the only story that contains no tricks. That's the only story that won't let you down. Now, before we close out this episode, we have to ask, how did it all end? In July of 1978, right in the thick of the disturbances, Janet Hodgson was hospitalized after nearly a year of relentless activity had left her physically and emotionally strained. She was admitted to Maudsley Hospital in South London, a psychiatric facility where she remained for several weeks under close observation. Doctors and psychiatrists carried out extensive physical and psychological tests, yet they found no medical explanation for her condition or for the strange events swirling around her. Guy Playfair noted that while Janet did have a few minor episodes during her stay, nothing came close to the chaos that had defined her time at Green Street. When she was eventually released and returned home, the disturbances picked up again almost immediately. That same summer, in an attempt to ease the pressure on both Janet and her family, she was sent away again, this time to stay at the Augustinian Sisters of the Sacred Heart Convent in Hertfordshire. For about 6 weeks, Janet lived under the care of the nuns. According to Playfair's book, This House is Haunted, she experienced little to nothing unusual while there. And back at the Hodgson home, the activity all but stopped. This lull became one of the strongest arguments for skeptics, who concluded that the phenomena were tied directly to Janet, whether through trickery, stress, or something darker. But when Janet returned home, the disturbances flared once more, continuing sporadically before gradually tapering off. As the months dragged on, the family grew desperate for relief. In 1978, Playfair himself invited the Dutch medium Dono Gmelig Mailing to the house. His approach was nothing like the dramatic exorcisms you see in the Conjuring 2. There was no battle with the Valak, no fiery showdown. Mailing simply prayed with the family and performed a quiet clearing ritual in private. Playfair later suggested that this marked a decisive turning point. The violent episodes, levitations, guttural voices, furniture hurled across the room, well, they ceased after this visit, according to him. To believers, this was the moment the oppressive force was broken. To skeptics, it was mere coincidence aligning neatly with a haunting that was already beginning to burn itself out. But here is where we must pause and think biblically. Though priests were indeed called in to pray for the family, no formal exorcisms were ever performed in the Hodgson home. And it grieves me that the only figure credited with banishing the entity was a medium. Scripture does not leave room for doubt or debate about this. God calls such practices detestable. Leviticus 19:31 says,
"Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them."
Isaiah 8:19 warns against consulting the dead instead of seeking the living God. Mediums are not harmless, my friends, nor are they neutral. Their work opens the door to counterfeit power and spiritual deception. So when people point to Melig as the one who ended Enfield, we must see the lie for what it is. Mediums cannot cast out demons. At best, they manufacture a temporary illusion of peace. At worst, they entangle souls more deeply in bondage to darkness. If any relief followed Mailing's visit, it was not because he wielded true authority. It was because the demonic chose to withdraw, strengthening the illusion that forbidden practices have power. Evil thrives on imitation. It can stage a counterfeit victory so that men and women put their trust in anyone and anything but the true deliverer. To credit a medium is to rob Christ of glory, when the Bible makes clear that only in the name of Jesus do demons flee, and only under his authority does real deliverance come. Even Playfair admitted that the activity had already been tapering off before Mailing arrived. No more dramatic levitations or violent manifestations were seen afterward, but strange phenomena did continue into 1979. The case did not end with a single dramatic triumph. It fizzled, fading slowly until the noise gave way to an uneasy quiet. Life inside the Hodgson home never fully returned to normal. Janet later admitted that even as she grew older, she sometimes felt a presence lingering, though nothing like the ferocity of those years. At 16, she left home, clashing with her mother Peggy and feeling unwanted under the same roof. Tragedy followed not long after, when Peggy's eldest son Johnny died of cancer in 1981 at just 14 years old. Peggy herself remained in the house until her death in 2003, confessing to the very end that the place never felt completely clean. After her passing, her son Billy briefly lived there. He described the house as heavy, uneasy, and unsettling, and later tenants echoed the same sentiments, though none reported anything close to the violent haunting of the late 70s. So how did it all wrap up? Well, not with a Hollywood-style showdown, not with the Warrens commanding the demon to leave, and not with the dramatic victory of a medium. It simply dwindled into a shadow, a lingering heaviness that never quite left the walls of 284 Green Street. And yes, the house still stands today. Today it is no longer in the Hodgson family's hands, but it remains a magnet for curiosity seekers and thrill hunters. The current occupants, ordinary people who only want a quiet life, have had to endure tourists knocking on their doors, strangers peering through their windows, and the constant intrusion of the house's legacy. Despite its unremarkable facade, the home carries a reputation it cannot shake. Decades later, it still wears the weight of its past like a stain that will not wash out. Today, both Janet and Margaret Hodgson are still alive. Janet, the younger sister who found herself at the very center of the Enfield storm, is now in her late 50s. As an adult, she has chosen to live quietly, away from the public eye, but every so often she has stepped forward to speak about her experiences, most notably during the renewed attention that came with the release of The Conjuring 2. In those interviews, Janet has remained firm in her conviction that the haunting was real. At the same time, she has admitted with disarming honesty that she and her siblings occasionally faked a few small incidents when the pressure of constant observation became too great. But she has never wavered from her belief that the overwhelming majority of what they endured was genuine. Her older sister Margaret, now Margaret Pegg, in her early 60s has also given her perspective in interviews. She is more reserved in nature. Margaret has nevertheless stood by Janet's accounts. She too insists that what happened inside of 284 Green Street was not imagined, not exaggerated, or simply the invention of restless children. While she acknowledges that skeptics will always have their doubts, Margaret has maintained that the heart of the story was authentic and terrifying. Together, both sisters continue to testify even decades later that the Enfield haunting was real. Their voices, tempered by age and distance, carry the weight of memory and trauma that refuses to be dismissed. My friends, this has been The Dancing Toaster, and this is the conclusion of our deep dive into the case of the Enfield Poltergeist. As always, I want to thank you for listening. Next week, we're off to the land down under. We're going to Australia to examine their most famous paranormal case, or cases, I'm still on the fence, as we continue our trip around the top 5 countries where people are tuning into The Dancing Toaster. But no matter where you're listening, please like, share, subscribe, comment, follow, do all the things wherever you consume The Dancing Toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let any poltergeist consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay. Nobody else will be taken from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. By the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a full tank of gas at all times. Be careful. Government officials